right, everybody, we're ready to get started. Let's do it. So we're here today to talk about the Ten Commandments. And in a traditional Anglican liturgy, the Ten Commandments come at a certain place in our communion service. Where do the Ten Commandments come? Zach? That's right at the beginning, right after the collect for purity. And we call it the Decalogue, or the statement of the law, right at the beginning of our Mass. Do we say it every week, or do we say it once a month? What do you think, Corey?
We say it once a month here.
Why once a month?
According to the 28th Hebrew.
That's right. It becomes optional, or you can do it once a month. But in the 1662, when do you do it? Every week. Why do you think it's every week in the 1662, and why once a month in the 28th? Zach?
62 was a lot more penitential than the 28, and you could tell it definitely came right out of the Reformation, while the 28 has been impacted by the Anglo-Catholic movement in Huntsville.
Very good. That's very good. That's spot on. I get to where a part of me loves it being a Sunday where we're doing the Ten Commandments because it's so reverent and it puts me in the right zone. But it takes a while. So like some months or weeks, I'm kind of okay with it not being there. What do we say after we hear each commandment? That's exactly right, Zach. Lord, have mercy upon us and incline our hearts to keep this law. I got one for you, Zach. Where did the Ten Commandments come from?
Exodus 20, 17.
Mm-hmm.
Also Deuteronomy.
That's right. You didn't fall for my trap question, which is they're in both Exodus and Deuteronomy. So when I was getting this ready, I got this wild notion of like, why are they different in different parts of our Old Testament? And I kind of ran that down. And apparently it's in Deuteronomy, Moses is telling the subsequent generation of Israelites the law. And it's like a different round of, hey, here's what God told us. And, they're the same. They're just a little bit different, and they can be ordered different based on that. So let's shoot forward to the first commandment. I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt have no other gods but me. What is God talking about when he says other gods? What do you think, Kat?
People that are, worshiping, the goddesses
Yeah, so like pagan gods and goddesses and stuff. Like if we went to India or something and we see Hindu worship where it's all these statues to all these different deities, that is certainly what that's talking about. Is there anything else in our time that it could also be talking about that we make gods out of, like lowercase g gods? Krill.
Money or fame.
Bingo. That's like the sermon today, right? Money, fame, anything else? Materialism.
Jewelry, wearing.
So it's not just other deities that might be turned into a statue that, people in other parts of the world might worship. It can also be things in our life that we put before God, like money, just like what we heard about in the sermon today. Let's shoot forward to commandment number 2. Thou shalt not make to thyself any graven image, nor the likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down to them, nor worship them. That's what we typically hear, but there's a little bit more in our book, where if you dig into it, there's another line. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, and visit the sins of the fathers upon the children, unto the 3rd and 4th generation of them that hate me, and have mercy unto thousands in them that love me and keep my commandments. What is this commandment about in our modern world? Any takers? How about in the subtext of Anglicanism? Is this a commandment that different types of Anglicans disagree on? So this is a tricky one, where if you do the deep dive into the different branches of Anglicanism, you get different answers on this question. We are a very high church place, where we will have statues that you see that are incorporated into our worship service. And we don't worship these statues. We may venerate them, and they may help us look toward Jesus, but not all Anglicans see it this way. And some Anglicans will emphasize this commandment through a homily that was written in the 16th century called the Homily Against the Peril of Idolatry. And that's why when you go into some Anglican churches, we don't have the statues. We have them here. And does anybody want to talk about that? Anybody have any ideas about why we have them and why some Anglican churches don't?
Is it because like some of them think it's more Catholic other than Anglican?
That's exactly it. So it's the high church, low church spectrum of more Catholic. You will see lots of statues in Anglican churches and lots of icons and the stuff that we have here. The more low church Anglican you get, the more Reformed it gets, where you see the spirit of the age in the 16th century is still very, very strong there. And they would not have the Stations of the Cross and things like that. Whereas when you go to pretty much anywhere influenced by the Oxford movement or the Tractarians, that has been reclaimed. Whereas, like right here, we have our Marian space. And, I've seen a lot of Episcopal churches, even in town here, that have a real strong, dedicated Marian space, but others don't. And it really depends on which side of that spectrum that given parish falls under. And I just thought that was neat, looking at that commandment, that in the world of Anglicanism, that is a very debated topic.
I have a question.
Shoot.
I'm just curious, with the lower church, less icon than even Anglicans are talking about. Are there any Anglicans, are those kind of Anglicans just not fond of icons, or are there any Anglicans that are strictly iconoclast?
They can get kind of iconoclast with it, where in their given parish, they will not have any icons and they would not allow icons to be there because they would emphasize the homily against the peril of idolatry above the Seventh Ecumenical Council. Whereas more high church Anglicans would say, we recognize 7 councils and the 7th council clearly prescribes icons being used in worship. And it even says things like it's anathema if you don't allow for icons to be used in worship. So it's really a question of emphasis. Is the emphasis put on the 7th Ecumenical Council? If the answer to that question is yes, you have icons. If the question of emphasis goes to that homily against the peril of idolatry written in the 1500s, then the answer would be no icons in that parish.
That's why Archbishop Laud was on trial for having crucifixes and having icons. He said, I am upholding this homily. He says, the thing about the homily is I don't worship them. I don't adore them. What I do with them is I look to them as a lesson. He says, it's a thing indifferent. And so a lot of those groups would look at that and be like, they can't see the distinction.
We come from a Laudian stream that kind of set the stage for the high church. So you have a church in England before the Reformation that is the epicenter of Marian devotional practices in Europe. England was called the Dowry of Mary. There's a huge shrine that was restored ultimately at Walsingham, where people would come from all over Europe to Mary's shrine in England. And then the Reformation happens. And these ideas from the continent, some from Luther, some from Calvin, and others, enter the English church, and there's a Reformation period, the English Reformation. And Cranmer's kind of at the tip of the spear drafting our prayer book. And he develops his theology into a more reformed space as he goes along. So in the beginning, his first prayer book is the most Anglo-Catholic of all the prayer books there is. And then it gets progressively more Protestant. And then Mary comes in, and she just abolishes all that, restores Catholicism for a few years. So you have this pendulum swinging. And during that time period, at the first part of it, you have a lot of things like you would see in here destroyed from parishes in England, where the Reformation had, at this point in time, a big effect on the actual parish layout, where things that had always been in these parishes were taken away, sometimes in a violent way. And then the reaction to that is what Corey was talking about with the Laudian emphasis of the more high church practices. You saw a return to looking at like the church fathers and what did they say about venerating icons and things of that nature, where instead of it being something so driven by the spirit of the age, the Reformation, during the era of Laud, it became something of looking back toward the patristic era, the church fathers, the 3rd century, the 4th century, the 5th century. What did people say and do back then? And Archbishop Laud and his faction kind of preserved that within the English church until you get to the Oxford movement. And that's where, they kind of take it and run with it, where the Tractarians wanted to reclaim virtually everything from the Middle Ages that had been lost during the Reformation. They look back to the Sarum use and what had been preserved during the Laudian era, which, for example, would be 2 candles on the altar, because a lot of people wanted no candles on the altar. And like the resistance was, we're going to have 2. It became 6 again during this Oxford movement stage of people within the Church of England reclaiming patristic practices that had been lost during the 16th century. Which shoots us up to the 3rd commandment. I got on a tangent. Sorry, guys.
Would you consider us to be a high or a low church?
Oh, we're high church. We're extremely high church. It kind of falls geographically in America, where there are certain parts of the country that are very, very high church. And it's the part of the country that was settled after the Oxford movement happened in England. So in the American South, there is a history of Laudianism that goes through the Virginia church, more so in South Carolina, that is just preserved all the way through. But these areas are settled by the time the 1830s happens. So when people are coming to America from England that are fired up with the Tractarian Oxford movement, Anglo-Catholicism, it's a different period of history where they're going to Wisconsin, they're going to Michigan, they're going to Illinois, they're going to that part of the country. And that kind of became what the Episcopal Church in the old days would call the Beretta Belt, because it's where like their bishops would wear Berettas, and certain Anglo-Catholic practices are just embedded in the DNA of the church there. So like Springfield in Illinois is kind of the epicenter of it. And here we grow out of that. So what started continuing Anglicanism was Bishop Albert Chambers, who comes out of the Diocese of Springfield. He was the bishop in the Episcopal Church of Springfield at the time of all the women's ordination issues, and he consecrated 4 bishops, and one of them was Bishop Morse in California, who came here and consecrated our church in 1984. So in a lot of ways, we are a direct descendant of the Diocese of Springfield, which means we have the most Anglo-Catholic of all, virtually. Fond du Lac was probably more Anglo-Catholic, but it's not an independent diocese anymore. So Springfield it's it. And now in the Anglican Church and the Episcopal Church in North America, you have certain places where Anglo-Catholicism is the dominant stream. Texas is probably like that. The area around Dallas and Fort Worth, extremely Anglo-Catholic. The Midwest is still very Anglo-Catholic. The part where it's growing is in the Southeast. Historically, we would top out at Laudianism until the Oxford movement happens. And like there's an Episcopal church in Huntsville at the time the Oxford movement's happening. And a lot of churches in the South were influenced by it. You have a bishop of North Carolina in the 1850s, I can't remember his name, but he actually converts to Roman Catholicism. He's so fired up about it. But historically, the South was more low church. And you would see that in places like the cathedral in Birmingham at the Church of the Advent. It's like the most low church place you can find. But it's very Orthodox, and it remained Orthodox when other places did not. And, we are the most high church of all the Anglican streams, but there's other types of Anglicans, and, they're Anglicans too. Zach.
Bishop Grafton in Wisconsin.
Oh yeah, Bishop Grafton was involved in the Shota House, and I don't remember the details. There's like a Breck and a Grafton, and I can't remember which one came first. But I want to say he was the first one, who's like the traveling bishop of the West, who starts planting all these churches in like the American Midwest in like the 1840s, 1830s, that era. Is that him?
I think probably not. He was a little bit later. He died in like 1912 when his body was incorruptible as it became.
There is a lot of these just really strong Anglo-Catholic traditions in like Wisconsin and that place where you go up to churches there and they look like this medieval, you can tell these places were built during the peak of the Anglo-Catholic movement, and this was where that was happening in America. Now in England it's a little different, where it's more it became much more widespread, to where the dominant stream in England, instead of it being so regional, pretty much became Anglo-Catholic for a long time. And they almost changed the prayer book in like the 1920s in that era, and it barely was stopped by the evangelicals. But I would say the church in England is probably more Anglo-Catholic than even the church in America. Side story. Back to the commandments. The third commandment: thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. This commandment is something that I am guilty of not keeping as well as I should, where I'll get frustrated. In our like modern language, there's just certain things that our culture has us like conditioned to say when we're frustrated or whatever that could probably be violations of this commandment. Why do we take the sacredness of God's name so seriously? Where does that come from historically? If we were talking to an ancient Israelite, would they even be willing to say God's name?
Rabbis,
Why not?
based on that, fraught with danger because they did it wrong. They thought that would be something that got
How would they do it wrong, and what were they afraid of?
For them, it was misspelling. They did not want to spell his name wrong, because if you spell it wrong, you had to burn that scroll. But that's more later on in history. For like ancient Israelites, the idea was it's written on the high priest's forehead. It's written out there so they can see that he's going into the holy holies to be God's representative. So you didn't want to go in there with another God.
Is it set aside from other names, and is it different? Is it more special than other names that we would say? Why?
Is the name of, so the name so often we look at it as gives you some
Buy-in, relationship, or ownership. You know somebody's name, it's acknowledgement that you can converse with them in a different way. And so taking the Lord's name as his representative and then trouncing it by saying he's not that important, he's not the King, he's not the Lord, you denigrate.
Don't denigrate God's name. It's kind of like if somebody's making fun of my name or something, I don't like it, or doesn't say it right, that kind of thing. All right, what about the fourth commandment? Does anybody know off the top of their head what the fourth commandment is? I'm not looking at you, Zach. Remember that thou keep the Sabbath day. 6 days shalt thou labor, and do all that thou hast to do. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt do no manner of work, thou and thy son and thy daughter, thy manservant and thy maidservant, thy cattle and the stranger that is within the gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the seventh day and hallowed it. What does it mean to keep the Sabbath day and this commandment? Any takers?
to avoid unnecessary work.
Avoid unnecessary work. And why?
In remembrance of God resting on the seventh day.
That's right. What does Christ tell us if we have an opportunity to help somebody by doing work on the Sabbath?
That you shouldn't be like unreasonable about it. Like, the Bible story where it's like, do not get your ox or whatever it was out of the ditch or something.
That's what he said. That was the analogy.
It's like our sermon today. It's who do we truly serve? Do we serve our livelihoods, or do we serve the Lord who gave us this life?
Good, sir. So I've got a question. There's not a right answer to this. But when we hear the Ten Commandments or other readings, but the Ten Commandments we hear on a more regular basis, do y'all prefer the Elizabethan language or like a more modern language? Doug says either. Anybody? Zach? So I was looking into how other branches of the church, particularly the Orthodox and the Roman Catholics, would treat this issue or similar issues. And in the more traditionalist quarters of those churches, you will hear certain things done in Latin or Church Slavonic, which in Latin's case, my understanding is it's not comprehensible. But my understanding is Church Slavonic it's like something that you can understand, but it's old and archaic and awkward. Is that fair?
It's pretty close to Russian. And persons fluent in Russian will be able to understand this.
That's right. So it's something that if you understand a Slavic language and you hear something in a church setting that's in Church Slavonic, you can understand it, but it's a little bit older or more archaic than what we would use commonly. Well, that makes it kind of special in a way, that it's been preserved in these other branches of the church, that when they are reading important pieces of scripture, they use a more traditional way of saying it, to where it's set aside, that it's not common. It's not like something we would read in a magazine or a book. This is something that's a little bit different. It's sacred. Is that how Church Slavonic works in the Orthodox Church?
Very much, yes. And also, in my opinion, translations can, I guess, make the accuracy get lost somewhere. The less it's translated, the more accurate it is, the closer it is to the more ancient.
People can play games with the translations, can't they?
I also feel like the newer versions of the ones just don't even.
A lot of them do. So some of them have this like different translation approach to be really true to going exactly what the text says in Hebrew or Greek into English. And it makes it very wooden. So like the NASB is a translation that does this, that they really want to be true to the original language. And it makes it hard to even use, to where it's not like, I don't know, the way we would even talk. Because in Hebrew, you might put certain things in different orders. So when you put it into English, it just reads like Yoda is talking. That would be the criticism of that. We do have some modern language translations that are fine. They're fine. Like the ESV is fine. It's kind of commercialized to where it's marketed real heavily, but it's a fine translation. The New King James is fine. The RSV that the ESV kind of grew out of is fine. But they don't really sound sacred to my ear. They sound kind of common. And I get other people disagree. This is one of those that even real high church Anglicans can say they want modern language. And it's fine. That's right. There's no right answer. They're both right. But I like thinking about that issue, about preserving the Elizabethan language as like our version of Church Slavonic or Biblical Greek that other parts of the church preserve.
It's also like what you use consistently becomes memory imprinted. So when people come into a service and they go to say the prayers, it can really throw them off when the words are changed. So you see that with some groups that be like, I can't say the Lord's Prayer any other way than how I've got it out of the King James Version.
A lot of people that come in from the Anglican or Episcopal tradition kind of get like pre-programmed in the way they learned it as a kid. And that can be good and bad, where if they learned a traditional liturgy, that's good. Or if they learn like something a little different, maybe it's not. But this is what I like to think about with the text is, are we preserving something of value by using the King James that would be lost if we were to use a more modern translation? Something to think on. Anybody have any questions? So I was planning to get through 5, and I just ran out of time yesterday when I was getting it together. So I ran out at number 4. So maybe next week we pick up at 5, if we know who's teaching next week. That's the question. All right, so we'll start with Clay next week, and let's go from the 5th commandment, which starts on page 100 or question 31, and let's have him go through the 10th commandment on page 111 or 356. So questions 300 through 356. Thank you all for being here.